Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. And now introducing 2023 Sine Fellow, Alida Garcia.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome for what is our final seminar this semester. If you can believe it, the 2023 cohort of fellows is winding down, and we couldn't be happier with ending the run here with you, Alida. So, Alida, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for all you did this semester. I think the issues you brought up, the guest speakers you brought really helped to give us some context and some thought around the issues around immigration, and really brought your expertise to the table. So I just want to first off, thank you so much for that.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a total joy working with all the students, and I'm really excited for this conversation because I think this is sometimes the stuff that students want to talk about the most, but don't necessarily have all the space to do so. So really grateful to be here.
Right. And here we are a couple of, weeks away from graduation for some. Some are winding down their very first, year at college. So I think there's going to be a lot of questions. I want to encourage everybody that's on our Zoom right now to just please ask questions as we go. We're not waiting till the end. I'll be asking some questions. You're more than welcome to ask them. But I just first and foremost want to start this out by saying, Alida, I don't know if you know this, you're what we call a 360 fellow. Are you aware of what a 360 fellow is?
Enlighten me, please, Amy.
Okay. A 360 fellow, not only because we think you're amazing, but it's literally somebody who's kind of worked in every sector. So you've done campaigns, you've done nonprofit, you've done private, you've done government. So we try to bring in practitioners from every one of those fields. And here you come along and you've done it all. So that's interesting. And if it's like in my family, half your family thinks you can't hold down a job and the other family thinks it's amazing and you had this great career. So I want to start at the beginning. 18-year-old Alida Garcia, what did you expect for your career? What were your passions, interests then, and how did they evolve over time? Just a small question to start.
I mean, I knew nothing. I think if I were to go back to 18-year-old me, I think 18-year-old me thought I was going to be a high school math teacher. My favorite movie was Stand and Deliver, which is about Jaime Escalante, who's a really old school famous teacher out of East LA who taught kids calculus, AP calculus. And so I went into Stanford and took a calculus class and did horribly at my first exam and was like, well, maybe this isn't it. So I think that's where 18-year-old me was, but I was also really quickly getting involved in student activism. As a freshman, I was arrested in a sit-in my first quarter at Stanford as an 18-year-old around labor practices. So I think, maybe I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had a sense of justice being a value that I felt very strongly in terms of how I should be spending my time and interests.
So you sought those things out. Was that something that in your family and growing up, was that around you a lot too, this sense of activism, or sometimes you find it more when you go off to college kind of thing?
I think a little bit of both. When I was an 18-year-old and I tried to do the math of what presidents the current AU student body has lived through, and then I started to feel really old, but when I was 18, I had this AP government teacher, and we lived through the 2000 election. And that was like when we learned about sort of the federal government and politics. And I remember like election night, we had a party and we were watching the states turn different colors. And at this time, I was growing up in Orange County, California, which at the time was very conservative, a very Republican part of California. And, you know, I was one of the lone sort of more progressively minded people in the room. And I remember Florida going blue and then Florida not being blue. And it was like, how can it change? Like what just happened? And then and so I think that class ended up going to DC for a class trip. And it was during the Bush inauguration. And like my classmates were going to celebrate and I went to the protests. And so I think that in many ways that event was like pivotal in my exposure as a young teen to just a whole world outside of what I was living, and some of that carried forward with me.
It's interesting because there's some of those pivotal moments and history can kind of guide you on some of that. It's fascinating that that's like the first big campaign because, oh my gosh, the things that happened in that Gore v. Bush, you know, in the Supreme Court weighing in, and it's just an interesting time. And then you go off to DC. Did that start the campaign? Like, how did you translate that? I know you've worked on, you know, a lot of campaigns. Like, what was the next thing? So you're at Stanford, you're studying, you're not taking another calculus class, I take it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would say that I was studying a lot. I think that I was organizing a lot. I you know, did student government. I helped like produce concerts on campus. I was a member of MECHA. I did like I worked on the elections commission. So I did a lot of like student activities. I didn't decide my major till late in the game. And to be honest, my decision to go to law school was one of my best friends was like, Alida, we're going to go to law school. And I said, okay. And so then we started studying for the LSAT. You know, all of this is very contradictory energy to what I've received in my time as a Sine fellow with all of the students who are so focused on their next steps at AU, which perhaps that's a generational difference. Perhaps those are structures that we've sort of raised our kids through in the generations. But I would say I was pretty not focused on what was next in college. And studied for the LSAT and went straight through to Columbia for law school. And felt quite quickly that was an environment. It's changed since I was there. It was a long time ago, but that was an environment that was not necessarily for people like me to thrive. It felt very like trying to create a corporate lawyer, which I ended up going to a big firm, but I didn't feel that that's who I was like as a person. There was like a lack of alignment there.
Well, but that brings up a good point because sometimes I think, and I know I've done it sometimes in my job, is that you stay maybe a little longer than you should because I can make this work. I can. So what do you do and what should you do if you're faced with like, I just don't think this is me? And my dad gave me some advice early on. He said, you never get the job you interview for. It's always a little different than what you interviewed for, right? So if there's a moment where you feel like this isn't the right course or this isn't the right major, or maybe this job isn't for me, like it's okay to like make those decisions. And how do you kind of plot the course and pivot where you have to?
Yeah, I think, you know, oftentimes people think that they have to have their next 10 years figured out. And that's just not the workforce in which we're living in. I mean, 5 years ago, if you would have said we were all going to live through a global pandemic and work from home, like that's not the world that we were going to be able to predict. And so I think sometimes we're putting too much pressure upon ourselves to believe that our next job is our last job, and that it's to serve every one of our professional needs. Sometimes the jobs we take as young people are to learn what we do and don't like about just work overall. Do I like being in an office? Do I prefer to be out in the field? Do I like reading and writing? Am I much more of a conversation person that wants to engage? You know, there's just different contexts that the work environment is something that we learn over time, and we pick things up. Like, I liked this about this job, so I want to make sure that's a piece of my next job. I didn't like this about this job, like the billable hour. I did not want to live my life in 6-minute increments. I felt that was immensely stressful. So that was something that I did not want in my next job. And so I think, relieving the pressure to not have it all figured out, but to be mindful about what's making us feel happy, what's making us feel passionate, and not always feeling the pressure to have 100% of our value systems 100% aligned with our workplace. I think that oftentimes right now, because we're going through, a generation that's grappling with identity, that's grappling with capitalism in the workforce, we sometimes are trying to live 100% of who we are 100% of the time at work. And oftentimes these structures are just not ready for all of us. And so, giving ourselves some grace to figure it out and to not feel locked into any one decision, I think is one of the most important things that young people can be doing today.
I think it's such an important part, and I'm glad you brought it up, because not everybody is fortunate to have a workplace that they get to work on issues they're passionate about. I mean, some people simply work to live, right? And like, so if you have this, I live to work and I get to contribute, that's a rare, and we should celebrate that if you have that opportunity. But there's other things that you can also do to kind of shape what you like to do with your spare time, how you like to contribute, if that's your kind of thing. But I guess one of the things you mentioned, you joined a lot of clubs, a lot of groups. I'm sure you had some internships or, summer jobs during that time. How do you maximize on those opportunities to try because we also know there's pressure with students. They want to attend every Sine Institute event that there is, of course, right? And then they've got classes and they've got finals, and they've got, a lot of them sometimes have internships or jobs. So how do you navigate that? What's the advice? Or even when you're just out of college and in the workforce, how do you find those things that kind of help you shape those and ask those questions?
Yeah, well, I want to say to those that are feeling pressure around summer and feeling like I got to get the most perfect internship to set me up for the next thing. My sophomore summer, I worked at Burger King. And 2 years ago, I worked at the White House, and the Burger King job was harder than my job at the White House. And so I just want to be clear that, like, dignified work comes in many forms, and sometimes we got to do what we got to do. And it's not setting you up for one type of work, now or into the future. I think that what is important to do, though, is to be thinking about what are you passionate about? Because I do find that a lot of my friends that have gone through some of these bigger graduate school programs and sort of just feel like they've been, in many ways, crafted into a certain type of employee, but never had that internal check, that once they get to be, later in their 20s or their early 30s, they have sort of this reckoning around, like, where am I actually trying to go? And so I do think internal reflection along the way around, what did I like about this job? What did I not like about this job? What am I wanting in a manager? What am I wanting in a team? Is important for people to be thinking about at everything that they do, because it's through that process that you'll start to piece together sort of your passion profile and hopefully find a place where you are aligned in both purpose and talents, in a way that also fits your lifestyle goals.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have to design, it's never going to be perfect 100%. I mean, managers expect certain things, but like, what environment do you thrive in? So like, what are things that bring the best out of you, right? As well. So I think that's incredibly important. One of the things is that I have found you over the course of time, there's a lot talked about mentorship. And what does mentorship mean? And how do you, I'm curious, did you have any mentors throughout college and your early career that you can think of that really had an impact on you?
Yeah, not formally. And I actually, excuse me. I've found myself in my career a bit more on what I would describe as, like, not the cutting edge, but the forefront of being like a new person like me in a space that typically people like me are not. Mm-hmm. And so with that, whether it was like going to a law firm where Latinas are 1% of the legal workforce, with that, I have picked up people along the way, but have never quite felt that like this person like knows my path or my needs or where I'm trying to go, in part because I actually don't know where I'm trying to go, because I still don't. I just turned 40 last week and I still don't know where I'm trying to go. But because I've kind of learned that so long as I work hard and maintain solid relationships, like it works out for me. But I did have one mentor who is a woman named Tori Osborne, and we never worked together. We organized together in the 2008 Obama campaign. And that was a really special campaign and time, because it just like felt like you were a part of something that was so sort of like beautiful and magical and historic, where we had this table of volunteers. Tori is, I don't know how old she's probably around 70, 75 right now. She comes out of the LGBT movement. She ran the LA Gay and Lesbian Center in the 80s in the height of the AIDS epidemic. And so, she was this organizer showing up for Barack Obama at the same time that California voters were voting on a proposition basically against gay marriage at that time. It was called Prop 8. And living that experience with her and seeing her show up for the country and the world when her own rights were at risk, when she could have just been spending 100% of time on that, really gave me sort of a deeper appreciation for practices of solidarity as an organizer. So over the years, she's kind of been this forever optimist, and sort of took the pain of that election and built this whole thing called Camp Courage that eventually set up California to move in the better direction thereafter. But because she's older than me, she just has this perspective of movement work in a way that like allows my cynicism to be challenged, because I'm naturally like a sarcastic and cynical person. And she's like, we're gonna win everything all the time. And so I've kind of learned through her that this work is a lifetime, that we're not going to see the world that we know that could be true in our lifetime, but that like it goes like this, and you pick up the wins and you experience the losses, and there are people like her that can spend 5-6 decades giving it their all. And so yesterday we lost Harry Belafonte, who I had the honor of serving on the board of his organization, the Gathering for Justice. And I think, you look at someone like Mr. B, who has done so much, whether it be helping to resource marches in the civil rights era, to, supporting civil rights leaders behind the scenes, to, advancing things in the arts. But people don't know, at the age of like 90, he was still like, his office was like ground zero for the planning for the Women's March in 2017. His organizing tentacles are far reaching. And so I think through people like that, whether or not they're in day-to-day mentorship or not, they can serve as examples around not feeling like we got to solve it all right now, because there are people that can show that this work can be beautiful and impactful over a lifetime, if you center yourself correctly.
I think that's such a smart thing, because we have the maybe mentors we have access to or work with, and that might be a big number, small number for some people, but there's ways to seek out, like, just even when they do interviews and whatnot, you can glimmer some interesting, anecdotes, or when they talk about leadership. I think he was an incredible example for so many people of like, what's possible and that devotion. And in a way, an interesting person who never held public office, but I think his public service, to your point, the tentacles go deep. So it's a different definition of that. I'm curious, like, so we've talked about mentors that are a little senior to you, that you work with, ones that you can emulate, that you see out there doing important work. I sometimes think we underestimate the peer-to-peer mentorship, right? Because sometimes it's like, I would love to call you sometime and be like, oh my gosh, I'm having this issue. I'm leading a team. We're doing this work. Have you been through this? Because I think sometimes we always think mentoring means people who have worked 20 more or 30 more years than us and have this, and that's a great value. But how do we not, miss the peer-to-peer mentoring that can happen. And do you
Yeah.
have like colleagues that you have really counted on and leaned on, I'm sure?
Totally. Well, you can call me anytime. Yeah, the girls chat is where it's at. So like that is where my strength and my day-to-day navigation of all the insecurities of being, I'm trying to like embrace 40. I don't know if that's like formally middle age, but I still like quasi-identify as a young person because there's a lot of old men in the things that I do. I work with the Congress.
It's funny. I was talking to somebody the other day. I remember my mom's 40th birthday. We had the black balloons and it said over the hill. And it was like, it was a totally different thing, right?
Yeah. So, but my most strength fulfilling times are with peer girlfriends who are similarly rising in their career, owning large, portfolios of impactful work, and also navigating similar life challenges that I am. I am a mother of 4-year-old twins, and these last 4 years have been sort of earth-shattering in my re-envisioning around my own identity, where I was so tied to my identity as someone who works hard and will go the extra mile, but like, from the hours of 6 to 8, I'm putting my kids down. So like, rather than working extra after 6, I am doing caretaking. And so sort of reconfiguring my views of myself during this period of time as a caretaker of young children requires like my ability to text and complain people that are going through the same thing. And so I've really relied on friends, some that I brought to Sine, like Alicia Menendez and Jess Morales Roquetto, and my dear friend Julie Chavez Rodriguez, who just was named campaign manager for the Biden reelect.
So exciting to see her in that role.
So exciting. But to girlfriends that are going through the same thing has really been really core to keeping my self-confidence up, and also like lessening the pressure I put on myself in terms of where I'm at in my career as well.
I think it's interesting because I do think it's also that they help remind you, to your point before, that your job identity is one part of your identity. And I think that's also something that I dealt with when I was younger. Sometimes I made it my full identity. So, and sometimes when you're on campaigns, the people you work with are your friends and your life and and it can be all consuming, but finding that ability to do that. So another part of mentoring, one of my favorite quotes, Alida, is lift as you climb. And I saw you do this firsthand when you were on campus at AU, but like, how important is it that as you're navigating, there's at 40, you'll be doing a lot of other high level jobs, doing different, things. How important is it to kind of put that hand down and help as you're still navigating?
Sure. Well, that's my favorite work to do. And I think it's critically important, unless we all want to burn out, is to be building leadership along the way. And so, I've prided myself over the last, really 10 years now, which is scary, doing that in two primary ways. So one, coming out of the 2012 election, where I was the National Deputy Latino Vote Director, we were working in a sort of a voter engagement system called the neighborhood team model that was reliant on organizers recruiting volunteers who had like 20 hours a week to give as super volunteers to sort of build out the volunteer infrastructure for Barack Obama. And there were a lot of young Latino organizers put in working class Latino neighborhoods who were not surprisingly, but surprisingly to the campaign management, not finding lots of people who had 20 extra hours to give to volunteer. And those folks were being called low performing organizers. And this game, Amy, like people get referred about how they did, are they good? Who's 100%. Sponsoring them in finding their next jobs. And so coming out of that cycle and getting to DC, I was just being asked for coffees, like literally, this is while I was looking for a job every other day, someone wanting a coffee to like get career advice. And I was like, this is not sustainable. So I, along with 4 others, started an entity called Inclusive, which has been working to help match people of color pursuing careers in politics and advocacy. And so, you know, over the years, we've done this both from organizing to get party committees and presidential candidates to self-report their staff diversity data and hold themselves more accountable to measuring growth over time, but also actually matching employers that are seeking this talent with their jobs. So I run a jobs board ecosystem, and we also do training for young talent of color who want to work on a campaign or work in Congress or work at an issue advocacy organization. And so that's been one way that I've been focused on helping to lift others. But the other thing that's been really exciting for me is my work at Forward.us. When we started, I was the only person of color on the team. It was a bunch of excellent, loving friends of mine, white male consultants. And now we are majority people of color organization, about 75, 80 people. And I've been intentional around growing a team of, it's been majority young women, but a lot of women who are undocumented, a lot of women who are first generation professionals, who are navigating sort of these type of workplaces for the first time, and been sort of laser focused on building a next generation of political leadership, of those that are a little less represented. And those some of them have stayed at Forward for many years and are now managing their own teams. Some of them have like gone off to law school, or one of them went to the White House. Like, it's been really cool to kind of see, you know, your little mentees like go off and bloom, and hopefully bring some of that commitment into the spaces that they're leading. And so that's my favorite part of my career, and I hope to find a lot more of it.
Well, you're an excellent example of that. We're going to make sure that our students that are on here and through our newsletter and through our network will get information on Inclusive to other people, because I think that's an important service that is amazing. I want to get back to that in a minute. We got a couple questions. I want to make sure I'm not the only one asking, but here's something that goes right to the root of Sine. As you work in, this is from Caleb, as you work in an issue area that is unfortunately, it's controversial. The issues that you tackle through Forward and the work that you talked about at Sine can be controversial. How do you find the balance to work with and educate people who disagree with you and what you fight and stand for?
Yeah, so I think part of what I talked about earlier in terms of feeling like, you know, I've been in a lot of career spaces where I've felt a little like there's not a lot like me around. That has helped shape my sort of openness and maybe my resiliency in engaging folks who don't see the hold on, my daughter just walked in. Okay, baby, 1 second. Speaking of work-life balance, give me 10 seconds.
This is so great because we're seeing firsthand that sometimes we do have to multitask, and we saw it certainly with like COVID. I know through COVID you were, you know, young mom and stuff too. So like you see this, but yeah. So how do you, you know, you're getting into it with somebody, you know, how do you disagree at work sometimes in a productive way?
Sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
So speaking of. Hey baby, she's mad that there aren't enough rice cakes in her bag right now.
Well, you know, I'd be a little upset about it too, Alida. You're obviously not hitting the work-life balance today.
So what was the question? I'm sorry.
No, and listen, we were talking, and Caleb was asking.
Oh, talking by partisanship.
How do you disagree at work? How do you disagree with people who might not, you know, but in a way that's constructive? Because not everybody at work, I'm sure, agrees with you on everything that you're trying to move forward, or outside organizations, outside individuals. How do you navigate that? I feel like we should at least see them if we're
Wait, baby.
Have her say hi. This is a new, hi there. Hi. Oh, she's being shy.
On the on the conversation of working with people that aren't like you, I think it's a choice.
I'm loving every part of this. I think, we'll bring them back to Sine when they're, headed off to college, we'll ask them some career questions too.
I'm very sorry. Well, I don't want to apologize for it.
No, absolutely not.
But I know it's loud for those that are listening. Okay. So, the reality is I have a 4-year-old who requires speech therapy, and his dad is taking him to speech therapy, which leaves the other small child here with me while I'm on this Zoom. So
we just want to know if she got her rice cakes. That's all we want to know.
She got her rice cakes.
That's actually in the chat. We want to know that. So
she may be back. So like I was saying, it's not for everybody to work like at the intersection of people that don't see the world like you.
Yeah.
I like have a little bit of an ego, and I like that challenge. And I like meeting people where they're at and going on the journey of like bringing them to the next step. It requires a different patience that perhaps like not everybody is like willing to take on, but I have witnessed transformation. I've transformed myself as a human being over time, and I just have a fundamental belief in not giving up on people. Obviously on immigration, it's tough because there's a lot of using of the issue in a way that is just rooted in lies, and the people that are saying the things that they're saying don't actually believe what they're saying. They're using it because they are making a bet that the American people think the same, and they want to capitalize on that fear that is actually driven by other economic interests that have nothing to do with a migrant showing up at our border.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's the challenging part for me in my work, is when I feel like it's completely inauthentic. If it's like an authentic misunderstanding or a lack of education, like those are the people that I want to spend my time trying to convince, because ultimately policy change is a math problem. I'm really pragmatic, and like I don't want to just talk to people who agree with me. And so it's not for everybody, but it's been something I've picked up along the way from being in spaces that are different and not necessarily designed for people like me to work in.
It's interesting. We've got a question from Jack. It's kind of from both of us, but it'd be interesting to get your perspective. Jack's asking, we've both worked within and on the outside of the Democratic Party. So how have you found these two areas to be different in terms of workplace culture? You want to take a crack at that?
Ooh, Jack. Okay. Look, I think I got some like good and some bad. I think in mission aligned work, you can have high expectations of employers to sort of live their values in their workforce. And perhaps you have opportunity to actually like craft and create that. I think that campaigns are not places where that is done well, because campaigns are short-term exercises with end dates. You're like genuinely not invested in a future beyond November 8th or whatever the day is.
Yeah.
And so with that, it's like everything is about money and margin to expand leverage to reach more voters to win. It's not about organizational health. And so sometimes campaign environments can be sometimes toxic if they don't have the right leadership. That's not to say all campaigns are that way, but most campaigns don't have HR departments, for example. It's not like a congressional candidate is going to hire an HR director. So these are leaner professional environments that are operating with an end goal of speed with an end date. And I think that sometimes the values that might be portrayed communications wise in policy don't always 100% match what the employee base is experiencing inside. That's not to say that like there aren't benefits of working in that environment too. Like I've worked in government that can sometimes be slow as snails, and like coming in with the campaign spirit of like, no, let's go do this, can like bring a lot of energy in moving things forward. And so I think there's pros and cons to each. There's different levers of power in learning in both of those sectors. but I don't think it's always 100% true that like you'll experience mission alignment with someone who is in politics or nonprofits and government sort of saying those things externally. It doesn't necessarily mean that the systems in which those employment ecosystems are structured are in a way to like provide that same experience for those that are doing the work of spreading that message.
I just would add, Jack, I would totally agree with you, Alida. I think the thing is, it's a pressure cooker, right? Because it's a time sensitive, things have to get done. People are looking to you to say, I need you to get this done because this is what is needed to get done. It's not necessarily always like the area I'm interested in, or how do I do, like, if you have to make so many voter contacts a day, that's the goal. And that's where everybody, gravitates toward. And they are smaller entities. They don't always have the workplace investment, on the place learning. But I will say, I don't know if you feel this way. Certainly some of the best relationships, if you go back to networking and contacts, have come out of this party, campaign environment for me. I mean, when I think about the presidential I worked on, I still talk to those people all the time. One of my friends from that his birthday was today and we were reaching out, but they also are people I go back to for that peer-to-peer. But, I think one of the other things is there are skill sets that you can capitalize when you work in these environments too, that can be attractive to all different, sectors, as well. I do think the problem solving, like literally when you're just given something and saying, you have to figure it out. How do you, do this? I think working in those pressure environments, crisis communication, like having to think outside your field a little does help. But, I agree. Sometimes any short-term, campaign, activist around a certain issue that's time sensitive, it's really the at the hand. But I agree with you. It's kind of like a mixed thing on that. Okay, we did have somebody who said, as a second generation Mexican immigrant and also a graduate student, I'm currently looking for a summer internship. Would Inclusive be able to help me find a summer internship? I'm not sure if that's a part of Inclusive's help, but
Yes.
like I said, we'll get around. What are some of the best things that Inclusive can do?
So Inclusive is free, is what I will first say. For all of our membership is free. And we also do not charge employers to use our jobs board for internships for this reason exactly. Like it is an equity issue to make sure that the talent that is seeking to enter fields that they might not otherwise have relationships or access to do know what internships are on the table. We do not post free internships, we post paid internships. But we do that free of charge. And every Thursday we send a list of all the jobs that came in from employers that week, and those include paid internships that we receive as well. So you'll find anything from, a policy organization to a congressional member to a local nonprofit who does direct services. Right now is a great time to be looking for internship opportunities, and we're seeing a lot of that come in.
Great. Well, we will make sure to get that to people. If anybody who's on the team on the Zoom today, if anybody can drop that link in the website, we'd love that, or in the chat. That would be great too. But we will make sure to get that information up. And there you go. And maybe it could be Alida to pop it right in there. So talk about organizer. All right. So the information's also in the chat. Here's a good question, because we talked about networking, and I struggle with this. At the beginning of my career, I thought the number of business cards you got meant success, right? But like Caleb's asking, how do you manage to stay in touch and keep track of the contacts you've made professionally and otherwise? Do you actively try to keep relationships alive, or do you find reconnecting can be easier than people think? That's Ben and Caleb. So,
yeah, I think earlier on getting out there is important. And I think near times of transition are important. I'm at this weird stage, Caleb, where it's like, I feel like I know who my people are, and like, but I'm also like, okay, what's next? And therefore I need to like start doing more, meeting new people, doing something like Sine, for example. And so I would say in a very shallow way, I keep up with a lot of people on Instagram, in terms of like soft, light touch. I know that like a lot of people use LinkedIn now. I think that I am not on LinkedIn the way that others are professionally, but my understanding is it's like far more of a social environment in terms of keeping up with people professionally. But the other thing to think about is like, depending on what work you want to do, like what are major convenings that are happening related to that work on an annual basis that you're like saving money for, to give yourself the opportunity for in-person connection. While I am a beneficiary of virtual work, and believe it's a lot of good, I do believe that there's nothing stronger than like actually spending human to human contact and interaction with people to truly grow a professional relationship. You know, a lot of campaigns or organizations will create like alumni listservs over time, but I do think finding ways to sort of know, like, from this experience, these are the 10 people that I truly bonded with. I'm not I'm not a super organized person with my relationships. It's kind of been more organic for me. That's not to say that you shouldn't be organized, but it is to say, like, networking doesn't need to be forced. Networking should be natural. And I think that like the peer networking is most important. I think that sometimes networking, like, I don't like this, like up, but like, or networking older or like more experienced or whatever, can sometimes feel inauthentic or just not be matched with like the conversation necessarily to move that relationship forward. You know, I think that sometimes for example, I'm always willing to help folks, but sometimes I just want you to like tell me what you need. like
Yeah, and I think
you
you bring up such a good point though, because one of the golden rules of networking is like, don't come to me if you want me to mentor you and be like, so what do you think I should do with my life? Like that to people like us, like who are trying to mentor, like that's one of the hardest things. Like there should be some concrete questions, some real, like, and also don't be afraid to say, here's the 2 or 3 things I want you to do for me, right? Like,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally. And you know, I welcome direction because I'm running around and like I need direction. Like, what if you're gonna get my attention for something, like what can I be, but don't be extractive about it, obviously. So that's a dance, right? And it's like dependent on the person. So I think networking is important, but like more so investing with the people in any one sort of job or professional setting that you care about. It could be, you know, for example, it could be more of like an affinity group across a sector that like that's a place where you feel most comfortable. So maybe it's like Black women in tech at some sort of like ecosystem around that, or maybe it's this is like, maybe you're like a movement person, progressive organizer, and so you're going to go to like Netroots Nation every year because that's like a big convening for people. So thinking about like who are your people that like make you feel most comfortable at home, and how are you getting more of those people at your table versus like going to the event where it's like the people that are a little not me and my vibe, that, you know, maybe you'll pick up a number or two, maybe that person will email you back because they weren't busy that day that you emailed them. But the other thing I would say about networking is like, don't take it personal if like you don't get a response. I think that that's something that it took me like 10 years to understand that it wasn't actually about me. Like whether or not I reach out to someone and they don't have time for me, it's not because like that person sucks or like I don't have the merit of worthy of that person's conversation. It's like, you know, inboxes are hell and sometimes people don't respond. And so I think that sometimes we can like personalize this or make it feel like, oh, we didn't belong there. And it might literally be as simple as like that person never saw your email. And so making sure that occurrences of outreach within your networking don't sort of lower your self-esteem over time is also like a really important thing.
Yeah, and I think it certainly shouldn't stop you from making the ask. I also think, you know, sometimes we feel like we have to keep up with somebody every month to be, I know people that I've worked with in my career, like from 20 years ago. And, you know, I'm not afraid to ask and say, hey, it's been a long time, would love to catch up. I know you'll have the answer to this. Can you help me with this? I find 9 times out of 10 people from past former jobs, others will want to help, you know, as well. So it shouldn't make you afraid. You never get what you don't ask for, right, Alida? So like you might as well put it out there and see what happens. Here's a good one, because this is funny. We talked about this before. You've worked in all these different sectors. You've had, you know, several jobs. Do you have any recommendations for starting a new job? Like, for example, do you think of goals for the first few months, accelerate learning? Do you make any connections with colleagues? How do you make it not overwhelming when you're starting? Like when I think about when you started at Forward, like how did you tackle that as something new too?
I don't even know. It worked out, but that was a scary time. So I'll take like when I went to the White House
Mhm.
in 21, because that was like my most recent new job,
Right.
I
That'd be
guess.
great.
There's a balance in projecting confidence and competence, and also like being a little bit of like a humble person who does not know what you don't know. And I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate as a weakness of mine working in politics is that I don't, this is going to sound bad, but I don't assume the worst in people, and I can sometimes be a little naive. And in other work environments, you might come across people that are like very internal politics focused, very power hungry, very focused on setting themselves up, and they are not aligned in mission, they're aligned in their own advancement. And while I believe myself to be a good judge of character, I don't always enter environments with like my antennas up around like folks that might have different visions and versions of where they're headed. And so I think going into new environments and doing one-on-ones and like getting to know like everybody and what their jobs and their roles are, and having a deep appreciation for like what is the piece of the work that they own. You come here, baby. It's like 15 more minutes. Having a deep appreciation and respect for the work that they do is important, especially in government, where it's very much so around like, what is your little piece of the
Right.
policy making pie? People can get incredibly territorial, and you want to respect that. I may not agree with it. I'm more of like a lateral, interdepartmental, collaborative human being, but you need to respect that other people might be coming into the work differently. And so for me, setting up one-on-ones to get to know like, what are you focused on? What are your priorities? What type of teammates do you like? Learning people's communication styles, and not treating everybody the same will set you up to be a powerful person within whatever organization you're working, because you're able to understand what everybody's bringing to the table. And it's really like organizing 101, like have a one-on-one, learn what people's desires are, give them a call to action. Like these are things we learn on campaigns, but they're applicable into workforces, in any kind of workforce. And so I think really taking the time to understand what people view as their own leadership within any one organization is an important thing to do.
Here's a question. I'll rephrase a little because I want to know both. Like in your career, is there a rose and is there a thorn? Like, is there that moment that you just felt so proud and you felt like you had impact? And is there a moment that just was really hard to kind of get over, especially in the type of work you're doing?
Lots of thorns.
Yeah.
Lots of thorns,
Yeah.
lots of roses too, though.
Yeah.
Look, in the last 3 years, I've ran 2 campaigns that won at the Supreme Court. And in this court environment is really hard. So
That's a rose to me. Yeah.
so that was the DACA campaign in 2020, and the Remain in Mexico campaign 20, I guess that was last year, 2022, in a really hard cycle when women's rights were
Yeah.
scattered about into disarray. And so but all of that came from a deeply painful loss for during the Obama administration at the Supreme Court on DAPA, which was a policy that President Obama created that never saw the light of day because it was challenged in the Fifth Circuit before it was able to be implemented. And so that happened in 2015, and or that case came to be in 2015. And so it's literally been like the pain of that loss like shattered everything. And took a lot of time to come out of, but the lessons learned in that thorn, like actually shaped not just me, like I'm saying, like I was leading a lot of this work, but like there's a coalition of actors who experienced that loss together. And the expertise from that loss helped fine tune our ability in 2020 to come out victorious and to be smarter about how we went about things. And so, you know, I think in movement work, the losses can almost be just as important. You know, I think I look at a lot of my friends who worked on the Clinton campaign, including my husband, and that was a really hard loss for people to go through. And for some of them, they're still grieving that experience, you know, many, many years later. And so I think that when you're in this work, you know, we have these heroic narratives that we watch, you know, the underdog win in movies growing up, and then we're all going to like go in there and win the thing, and everybody's injustice prevails for everybody. But that's not the world we live in. And so, you know, that was a big thorn that I think it also jaded me a little bit. I look back to the version of me before that loss, and I think I like, maybe always thought that winning was like around the table, or around the corner. And it kind of like put me in my seat a little bit, and in ways that, I don't wish I was hardened in that way. I wish I was equally as hopeful as I was leading up to that decision, but I am also grateful for like the positive things that have like come out of that lesson. And so I think there's good and bad in those experiences professionally.
Here's a good question from the audience. You've dealt with the pressure and the responsibility that can come working with really high profile people. How do you navigate those scenarios? Certainly at the White House, you know, you're going to brief, like you're in these rooms, you know, with the work you've done at the foundation, in your government work out on the West Coast. Like, how do you handle those situations? Oh, wait. I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I was saying
It's going to be good. So I wanted you to unmute.
I have like pictures of like my Oval Office meeting. I was like, that was a very scary day behind me.
You look so confident in that picture. We love using that picture at Sine, but yeah, there you walk in and it's like, oh yeah, I just have to, you know, brief the president on this stuff.
Little old me and the president. High profile principles. So I would say this. I have a lot of admiration for people who are willing to step into public leadership. It is not easy, and I think often the job is not what people envision it to be. And I think that oftentimes people in leadership are crunched for time on everything. And so I think for me, working with high profile principals, you know, that being like tech executives to elected officials to mayors, well, mayors are elected officials, to other, you know, political leaders. I think it's in part like doing my homework about what's most important for them to consume.
Yeah.
And to be sort of context aware that this is someone who has been like ushered through their day since they woke up in like aggressive, like, and now you will do this over the next 15 minutes, and now you will have this call and be an expert on this issue, and now you will go speak passionately about this bill that you're introducing, and now you will go meet with these people and act like you know what they're talking about, and like making sure that you are leveraging, maximizing your impact within the limited time you have is like really important. And the other thing that I have come to appreciate in working with high profile individuals is, you know, let's take the vice president. So I organized for the vice president in her first statewide race. And this was when she was a district attorney in the Bay Area. And so I was helping sort of socialize her relationship base with the Latino community and young people in Los Angeles. And so I really got to know her over that time. I would like drive her in my car and like take her to fundraisers and like, you know, it was very mom and pop retail politics. But then at the White House, like I had to like brief her as the vice president. And what I love about most of our vice president is that she is an incredibly intelligent human being who has like expectations of her like staff of being thinking about the highest best use of like what policies should be, how should we be thinking about this policy, what are the policies, who should be at the table. Like she's really at a level of thought and analysis that I don't always get when I work with Congress in other ways. And so with that, it's like you want to perform, you want to like show up. And I think that sometimes we can get scared in moments with these folks, but I think remembering that they are just human beings who need the accurate information means like prep, do your homework, know what you're going to say, know why you're going to say it, and like have and think about what they might ask and have answers to those prepped in your back pocket. And I think that that has served me well over time is actually doing prep into meeting conversations and thinking about how is this conversation going to go, kind of visualizing what are the types of follow-up questions they might ask, what would I answer that, how would I do that briefly, like, and actually going through that own exercise has been a way for me to sort of lower my anxiety level and my imposter syndrome in these spaces.
I think that's all so important. And it's interesting because they all have their own individual personalities, like when you're working with different high profile people. I think the other thing is, I want to just capitalize on something you said that I think is so important. You said accurate information, because I wonder if you'd, you know, had a similar situation. Like I was briefing Secretary Kerry when he was running for president. And I remember I didn't have an answer to something he asked. And I think sometimes our initial reaction is to say, oh yeah, or having the answer is more important than having the right answer in our head. And all I said to him is, sir, I don't know, but I will know in 5 minutes. And I thought, well, this could be the end. I might not be, you know, briefing him on the plane anymore. That might be done. But I think in that moment, he knew that I was never going to give him something that wasn't right. And they're counting on so many people to give them right information. So I think it's okay in these scenarios too. And I just share this because it was a learning moment for me, that accurate information is more important than just having it, right? Like whether it's right or not for these people.
I mean, entire careers can be lost on inaccurate information. And so it's not about you succeeding in that moment. You need to be thinking about like what is actually going to be happening with that information. And if you didn't know, you didn't know. Or if it's information that there was no way of you knowing, like that's fine too. You can go and get it thereafter. But that's also like where relationships with within office are important. So like, how would Amy be able to follow up with Secretary Kerry in that moment? It might be passing a note to his body person who's like with him in the next meeting because maybe you weren't on that calendar, so that that person can give that information and close that loop and show that you were competent and delivered as you said you would. And
follow through.
But that doesn't happen unless you have that solid relationship. And so this is why it's important to not be, you know, one of these people who's like gunning for their own success and everybody is expendable, because these ecosystems are really reliant on teamwork and high pressure environments, and you can't excel on your own. It's just not possible.
I'm going to ask you one more question. And unfortunately, this flew by. I could talk to you all night, but then also I don't think your daughter would like that. We've got to get back to her and our rice cakes. But
now
yes, we want to make sure that that's intact. But I will say, like, is there something you wish you knew about your career path when you graduated from college? Is there anything that like now you look at the trajectory that you say, oh, I wish I'd known I was going to do that, or this was, you know, that kind of thing?
I think I'm thinking about 22-year-old me, and I just think like you're gonna be great. It's like probably what I would have wanted to hear. I had a lot of bad experiences in college and in law school around my writing, where I was like told I wasn't a writer. I had people say like, this level of writing is unacceptable at this institution.
Really?
Someone was like, English must not be your first language. And English was definitely my first language. And so I had a lot of insecurity around whether or not I could write because of like things jerks said in these classroom environments. And like now I have written memos for the president of the United States. I have written speeches for senators to say out loud. I've written op-eds for ghostwritten op-eds for countless amounts of people. Like I can write and I am capable and I'm going to be fine. And like being authentic is going to be okay. Like I think that is another thing that I probably spent a good, I don't know, maybe like 7 years out of college, just kind of not quite feeling like I knew what my home was going to be professionally. And that was actually just a part of the journey to make me most secure now in where I'm at. And to be able to like be invited by a school like American to like talk to people about my thoughts and ideas. That is something that I would have never have imagined when I was in college, just kind of figuring it out and hoping for the best.
Well, I think it's an excellent way to end. Alida, we have been more than honored to have you here, and we are so excited that we now have a relationship with you here at Sine. I'm so glad that we've had mutual friends forever that have just sung your praises to me, and I'm getting to know you was a great joy this semester too, and I appreciate all the work you're doing. Just as we wrap up here, a couple quick things, if you don't mind, Alida, because we did have 2 incredible co-sponsors, for our career conversation series. It was the Career Center here at AU, which I highly recommend. Use the Career Center. We've got inclusive up there. There are resources. I don't want people to think that just because they're not sure how to start, like there are resources for you. So that's important. Also, thank you to the American University Alumni Association. I don't know if you know this, Alida, I was surprised to find out as an Eagle myself and as an alum, there are over 145,000 American University alumni worldwide. There are a lot of people out there doing incredible work that are a resource to us simply because they, we're on campus, we're proud Eagles and experience the university like you, and they're ready. A lot of them are ready to help. So for current students, connect with alumni through the programs such as the Dinner with Alumni in summer and February, join the Student Alumni Association. Alumni Fire is that communications platform you can use. If you're soon to be an alumni, some of the people on here in 2 weeks, if you can believe it, Alida. And if you're staying in DC, join the DC Young Alumni Chapter. If you're leaving the area, there's alumni chapters across the country. There's alumni affinity groups. I know, Alida, we were so pleased to have you come and speak to one of our alumni groups while you were here with us at Sine, and stay again collected through, Alumni Fire. I also will say that the Sine Institute loves nothing more than to have alum enjoy our programming, be involved, as a great way to stay connected with the university as well. Alida, I am so looking forward to staying in touch and finding out the hard work that you're doing. You are welcome anytime at American University's campus. Again, you have been a great joy for us this semester, and we were really proud to have you with us.
Thank you so much. What's the saying? Once an eagle.
Once an eagle, always an eagle.
I'll be back.
Yes, and Bill did say it at his thing too, for sure. But you're always welcome. And so thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Have an incredible evening, and stay tuned to Sine. We'll talk to you soon.